America's vast mobilization for World War II helped put an end to unemployment. In the early 1940s, the nation's factories retooled from making cars and refrigerators to building tanks and airplanes. Millions of Americans essentially put their dreams on hold to fight the threat of fascism. And sacrifice became patriotic.
America's fighting men need meat, the best meat, plenty of it.
That's why we civilians are holding our consumption to 2.5 pounds weekly.
As a housewife, I find I can still prepare delicious, nourishing meals. There's no limit on chicken and fish.
But in the midst of these wartime sacrifices, Roosevelt still promised that his government would make prosperous times return. He said the security of the nation depended on it.
People who are hungry, people who are out of a job, are the stuff of which dictatorships are made.
In this 1944 speech, FDR went further than any other president in history to declare economic security as an American birthright. Roosevelt's New Deal had already put in place an economic safety net that included Social Security for the aged and the sick and insurance payments for the jobless. But this time, Roosevelt suggested Americans should be guaranteed even more. He called these entitlements a second Bill of Rights. Among them were the right to a job, the right to a living wage, and
the right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health, the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age and sickness and accident and unemployment. And finally, the right to a good education.
Roosevelt essentially wanted to guarantee Americans a middle-class standard of living. His message was, not only can you dream about prosperity, you are entitled to it. Of the many huge changes FDR introduced, perhaps none shaped American life as much as the GI Bill. The law that FDR signed in 1944 put home ownership and college education at the center of the modern American dream. Historian Edward Hume says early drafts of the GI Bill included benefits like medical care and unemployment payments.
And then the notion arose that, well, maybe some of the veterans will want to come back and go to college. Let's pay for that.
The GI Bill offered free tuition for any veteran who could get into college. University presidents hated the idea. They said veterans would drag down educational standards.
President of the University of Chicago at the time said, well, we're going to transform our colleges into hobo jungles if we do this.
When I came back from 2.5 years on active duty with the United States Marine Corps in World War II, I decided that I wanted to go on to graduate school.
Marine Corps Captain George Schultz was one of roughly 7 million returning veterans who used the GI Bill to get a degree.
And earlier, before the war, I had applied to the graduate program at MIT in economics and been accepted. So I said, here I am. You admitted me before the war. How am I going to pay for this? Well, I heard about something called the GI Bill. I got my tuition paid, and I got a little tiny stipend to go with it.
George Schultz built a distinguished career on that GI Bill education as a scholar, a business executive, and as U.S. Secretary of State. Schultz says the GI Bill didn't lower standards at American universities, it transformed them.
Because all these veterans came back, and they're very serious people. We were there strictly to learn something, and we were demanding, and there were lots of us. And so I think it helped to raise the standards all across America. And now we have, without any question, the best system of higher education in the world.
The GI Bill also offered returning veterans major subsidies to buy a home. But after years of throwing all its power and materials into the war effort, America didn't have enough housing for the veterans to buy. Author David Kushner.
People were sleeping in the backs of boxcars. They were shacking up with family members in very small apartments. It was a genuine housing crisis, and it was really just a national embarrassment.
Dottie's folks are swell, but a fellow would like to spend a little time alone with his wife after 3.5 years of community living in barracks and foxholes.
A government film made just after the war explained the acute housing shortage. and it called on landlords to keep rents low until new housing could be built. In the post-war years, the federal government scrambled to build housing for veterans. It funneled money to private developers to get homes nailed together and on the market. Builders converted miles of bean fields and broccoli farms into tracts of modern housing. In the late 1940s and the early 50s, millions of American families decamped for the new suburbs, all courtesy of the GI Bill. Historian Edward Humes.
It made something possible that hadn't been possible before for these veterans who had a very modest means to come in and, because the government was underwriting their loans, buy a house with no money down and a mortgage payment that was cheaper than they could rent a place in town. And boy, that house came with a new washing machine and refrigerator if you just paid an extra $50 or something absurd like that. And it was a wonder.
By granting millions of World War II veterans access to home ownership and to higher education, the GI Bill helped spur unprecedented post-war prosperity. And that prosperity went hand in hand with a mid-century revolution in mass consumption. In their new suburban homes with their shiny new cars, the post-war American family needed a new place to go shopping.